Chapter 18. Matt sighed and scraped the last of his brownie from the mug. "She's usually not this late," he said to Sarah, who was curled up at the opposite end of the couch. They'd been watching TV, but Matt was getting impatient. He and Erin didn't have any plans tonight, but he'd been burning with an urgency to see her all day. After their kiss yesterday, they needed to talk. Sarah scrolled through the Netflix menu. "She treats you like dirt, you know," she said out of the blue. "That's not true. She's just impulsive and kind of irrational at times." "Yeah, not really what most people want in a girlfriend." "But there are good parts too," he said loyally. "Her impulsiveness is usually because she's trying to help, like this dog-sitting thing. Erin doesn't even know Mrs. Brinkerhoff very well, but she needed help and Erin didn't hesitate. She jumped in with both feet, ready to do whatever she could." "But look who got stuck with the dog." "That isn't her fault." "It's certainly not mine," Sarah bristled. "It's no one's fault." Matt backpedaled quickly. "A miscommunication, that's all." "Look, I live with her," Sarah countered, "and she can be great, but I think she takes advantage of you, and if it hasn't happened by now—" She trailed off, leaving him to finish the sentence. Matt sighed. "Believe me, I've tried to tell myself that many times." Sarah's attention wandered back to the TV, but Matt's mind was on Erin. He'd thought long and hard about how things were between them. It had been 2 years, and any logical person would have given up by now. But he couldn't. He'd tried. He'd even dated other women, but nothing clicked. Maybe because all the other girls he dated all shared one key quality: the quality of not being Erin. Besides, she'd let him kiss her. No matter what she'd tried to pull with the leaves afterward, he knew she'd wanted him to kiss her. He wasn't about to give up yet. They both turned at the sound of a key in the lock. Erin rushed in, looking flushed and breathless. Her eyes were sparkling. "How did it go?" he asked, even though it was obvious she'd had a great rehearsal. Erin let out a dreamy sigh and flopped down on the couch. "Unbelievable," she squealed. "You'll never guess who joined the cast." Hurriedly, she told them about Brennan. "And oh my gosh, he's incredible," she finished. "The chemistry between our characters clicked like that." She snapped her fingers. "Mona says it adds a new layer to the play." Matt felt like he'd swallowed an icicle. A cold dread swept through him. He hadn't expected her to come home and run straight to his arms, but he really hadn't expected this excitement, this dreamy look in her eyes, a look he knew wasn't for him. "Sounds exciting," he finally said. Erin nodded enthusiastically. "I had no idea Mona knew Brennan Avery, of all people. If anyone can get us to Broadway, he can. Though why didn't Mona cast him to begin with so we didn't have to waste so much time trying to work with Jacob? Seriously, it's like night and day." She trailed off when she saw the expression on his face. "What?" she demanded, a note of defensiveness in her voice. Sarah clicked off the TV. "I think I'll go take a shower." She turned to Matt. "And maybe you should consider what I said." She gave him a knowing look before disappearing down the hallway. "What was that about?" Erin asked. "What'd she say?" She went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Matt leaned forward and rubbed his eyes. His stomach churned. "Nothing. She was asking me some questions before you came home. Questions about us." Erin scowled. "First of all, it's none of her business. Second, you say that like there is an us when there isn't. At least not that way." "Yeah, I know, Erin." His temper flared. "You tell me all the time. Yet somehow I always seem to be the first person you call when you're down and the first person you run to when you need help. Why do you think that is?" Erin slammed her glass down on the counter, sloshing water over the rim. "Well, pardon me for thinking we were friends and believing for some strange reason I could count on you." That's not what I'm saying, and you know it. Really? Then what are you saying? You claim you want to be friends, but that's not the truth, is it? No matter what I give, you always want more. You're always pushing, trying to get me to feel something I don't. She grabbed a towel and threw it on top of the spilled water. Stop pressuring me! The anger whooshed out of him, leaving him deflated and tired. He got to his feet. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You're right. I do want more. I guess I'm not very good at letting go of something I want. Or someone. He amended quickly when she opened her mouth to argue. But I'm not trying to force you. All I've ever wanted is a chance. I gave you a chance, she whispered. That's what this whole last week has been, don't you see? And it wasn't enough. Is that what you're saying? Erin paused, and Matt had his answer. I need to go, he said. It's time to walk the dog. She didn't answer as he let himself out. Time to walk the dog. Erin swished the damp towel over the kitchen counter in quick, angry strokes. Of course he had to throw that at her. As if she didn't already feel guilty enough. Now he was leaving to take care of a dog he didn't even want. A dog he got stuck with because of her mistake. She blinked back tears. This had been a great day. She wasn't going to let Matt ruin it. Besides, she didn't have anything to feel guilty about. Okay, the dog, yes, but not Brennan. One kiss didn't mean anything. She and Matt weren't a couple. She had never asked for his loyalty, and he had no right to demand hers. She crumpled the towel in her fist and went toward her room to throw it in her laundry basket, but paused outside Sarah's door. What had Sarah said before she'd come home? And why were they talking about her anyway? Fresh anger rose at the thought, but she forced it away and continued to her room. She couldn't worry about them. Brennan had changed the play. She had to go through every scene to examine how her character would react to this new and different version of the leading man. And after that, she had an entire list of personal grooming tasks to complete tonight, including a full manicure and pedicure, moisturizing treatment for her hair, and waxing. So much waxing. Chapter 19. Matt hadn't known much about Brennan Avery before Erin told him he'd joined the cast. But thanks to a late-night Google binge, he certainly knew plenty by the next day. Brennan Avery. Handsome, rich, young, talented, and available. What more could Erin ask for? The next morning, Matt skipped work. They'd finished the mayor's Christmas ornaments, and there wasn't anything urgent to work on. He stayed home, alternating between trying to catch up on his missed sleep and sitting at the couch staring moodily at nothing, while his mind churned through scenarios between Erin and Brennan. She had laughed about taking part in the Billionaire Bride Pact, but he knew that secretly, she still harbored hope it could happen, especially after Nikki's lavish wedding. And with Brennan, her hope was probably rekindled with a fury. The thoughts of Brennan giving Erin all the things he, Matt, wanted to, but couldn't afford, canceled out any chance of sleeping. It was almost noon when his phone rang. He shoved a sleeping Roswell out of the way and dove for it. Matt hoped it was Erin, and his heart sank when he saw Corbin's ugly mug on the caller ID. Hey, he answered, his voice slightly hoarse from not being used much. Are you coming in today? Corbin asked. Matt ran one hand down the thick stubble on his jaw. Not planning on it. Why? The mail came and Ma's locked herself in the office. Seems really upset but won't talk to me. I'm coming, Matt said. Everything was strangely quiet when he arrived. They had no customers, and Corbin paced around the showroom, concern etched on his face. Matt shared a look with his brother and made his way to the office. Ma, are you okay? He called, knocking on the door. After a moment, the lock clicked, and their mother opened the door. He took in her pale complexion and red eyes. He jerked his head toward Corbin, and they followed their mother back into the office. Corbin shut the door and leaned against it, eyes wary. "This came." Their mother extended a single white sheet of paper to him, her hands shaking slightly. One look at the logo across the top, and Matt didn't need to read it. They'd missed the last 4 loan payments. He knew the bank would be starting foreclosure proceedings. He swore softly and dropped into the chair on the opposite side of his mother's desk. "I knew it was coming, but it's still a shock to see it there written down in black and white, you know." Tears pooled in her eyes. If anything had been left of Matt's heart after Erin was through with it was shredded at the sight of his mother's tears. He swallowed hard. "I know. I don't know what else we can do. We've tried everything, haven't we?" She nodded sadly. "I'm so sorry. I hoped we could keep it going. In his honor." She glanced at the framed picture of their father sitting near her computer. "It's okay, Ma," Corbin said from his spot in front of the door. His hands were balled into fists and stuffed in his pockets, but his voice was steady. "I know. It just doesn't feel okay right now," she whispered. Matt's mind was blank. Now what? All he'd ever wanted to do, all he'd ever known, was glass. And now that dream was melting like the shards of a broken piece when he threw it back into the fire. Chapter 20. Erin could hardly believe it was even the same play. Adding Brennan had changed everything. He certainly deserved his reputation as a terrific actor. His energy was infectious, and the entire production seemed to be infused with new purpose. Scenes came alive in a way they never had with Jacob playing the role. Brennan pushed everyone to explore new facets of their characters, especially Erin. Mona asked Jocelyn and Mitchell to stand in during the tech rehearsals so Brennan and Erin could work on their character interactions. And their chemistry, which frankly did not need a lot of help. They spent a lot of time in the smaller rehearsal room, hashing out scenes, and the air crackled between them. Every time they made eye contact, Erin's heartbeat edged up a few more notches. If she could have special ordered a boyfriend, he would have been exactly like Brennan, and not just because he was famous, rich, and drop-dead handsome. He was also extremely kind and funny, and they shared the same sense of humor. The morning he began laughing and pointed out an unintentional pun Jocelyn had made, Erin was a goner. She wasn't the only one attracted to Brennan's charisma. The entire cast and crew orbited around him like satellites. "Have you met the theater ghost?" Jocelyn asked him when they stopped for lunch. "Not yet." Brennan's eyes lit up. Erin bit back a smile. Actors were notoriously superstitious, to the point that wishing someone good luck was extremely rude, and saying the name Macbeth inside a theater would often produce a general freakout. "Her name is Eleanor and she lives in the basement," said John, one of the lighting techs. Jocelyn leaned closer to Brennan. "Want to go see?" "Sure." He leaped to his feet and held out his hand to Erin. "Coming?" John led them down the stairs, through a rehearsal room, and down a second flight of stairs to a door with chipped gray paint. It creaked ominously when John pushed it open, and shivers ran up Erin's spine. In the room beyond, there was only blackness. "Ooh, spooky." Brennan got out his phone and turned on the flashlight, shining the beam around the space, revealing flashes of old props and a lurking shadow in the corner. At last, Brennan's light illuminated the pull cord hanging in the middle of the room. John yanked the cord, and a single dim light bulb flickered to life. The basement was a huge room walled in rough concrete. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and dust covered the prop pieces. Chairs, tables, boxes of books, and the white cow from an old production of Into the Woods. The lurking shadow turned out to be a huge black boiler at least twice as tall as Erin. It was menacing in the silent darkness, and a creepy chill raced through her.
"Eleanor, are you here?"
John called, his voice swallowed up by the room. They waited. Erin hardly dared to breathe. Her ears were straining for some sound.
"Eleanor,"
John called again.
come out, wherever you are."
"Okay, I don't like this," Jocelyn murmured.
"It's just Eleanor,"
John said.
"She doesn't hurt anyone. Usually."
"What does that mean?" Erin's voice was shrill.
"Eleanor used to work at the theater,"
John intoned.
"One day she was in the basement lighting the boiler, and someone, no one knows who, snuck up behind her and pushed her in."
Erin stared at the boiler, noticing for the first time that there were doors in its cast iron side.
"Whoever did it latched the door, and Eleanor burned alive,"
John continued in a menacing voice.
"And now her ghost wanders the building, finding no rest until she avenges her murder."
Erin was usually the first to dive into a good ghost story, but her mouth was dry as she stared at the boiler. Have you seen her?" Jocelyn asked.
John nodded. "Once down here, once in the hall outside the rehearsal room, and once on the catwalk above the stage. All her hair is burned off, and one side of her face is a mass of melted scar tissue. If she catches you looking at her, she'll—"
They stared at him in silence. Erin's nerves were tingling in anticipation.
"There she is!"
John hollered, pointing directly behind them. Jocelyn screamed, and Erin let out a gasp. Instinctively, she threw herself at Brennan, who wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. He laughed.
"You're a good storyteller," he told John. "You should be an actor."
John chuckled modestly.
"No, thanks. I'd rather do the tech."
"That was mean," Jocelyn panted, one hand clutching her chest. "I could have had a heart attack." She turned and stomped up the stairs.
"I'm only kidding,"
John called.
"Jocelyn, come on, it was a joke."
He hurried after her.
"You okay?"
Brennan looked down at Erin. He still held her in his arms, their bodies pressing together. And her shivers of fear were quickly being replaced by shivers of a different kind. "Sure." It came out as a squeak, making him chuckle. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Sure. Sorry, I guess I'm a wimp."
"I'm not sorry,"
Brennan murmured. His head dipped as his mouth came down to meet hers. Erin's heart beat out of control. Brennan's shirt was warm and soft under her fingertips as she slid her arms around his waist. His hands pressed against her back, pulling her closer. The roughness of the stubble above his lip rubbed on her cheek as he moved from her lips to kiss along her cheekbone, then back. When they broke off for air, he smiled.
"I hope that's okay."
"I wouldn't have let you if it wasn't okay," Erin replied. She took a step back. As much as she wanted to stay in Brennan's arms, she was cold, and the basement was still giving her the creeps. "Let's get out of here." Brennan grinned.
"It's probably almost time to start again."
He threaded his fingers through hers and led her to the stairs, and her surge of happiness was almost strong enough to push away the thought that her fingers fit slightly better with Matt's than they did with Brennan's. Chapter 21. The show didn't start until 8, but Erin was at the theater by 2. Opening nights were special, and she liked to take her time, walk through her lines and marks, and take a few moments to absorb the feeling of the theater. This was the payoff: the long weeks of rehearsals, the effort of memorization, the pain of character development, all coalesced to create this very special sense of anticipation, and she hated to rush it. She put her backpack in her dressing room and made her way to the stage. The house lights were on while the front of house crew vacuumed the aisles and wiped down the chairs. In the booth, the sound and lighting techs went over cues. The lights on the stage flashed in and out as they hit each mark. No one took any notice of her. She closed her eyes, letting herself enter the zone where she became the character. She did one walkthrough, took a small break for water and an energy bar, then did one more walkthrough. An hour before curtain, they had a cast meeting. Mona was radiant in a beaded black dress. Marion Hershey from Juniper Tree and Carrie Eldridge from the Collins Group are here, she said, naming two big-name Broadway producers. We had lunch this afternoon, and they're very enthused about the prospects of this show. Erin glanced at Brennan. There was no question he was a big reason the producers were here. They were putting on makeup when there was a knock at the door, and the stage manager entered with flowers in a crystal vase. Erin, she said brusquely, handing over the flowers. No card, though. It was a huge bouquet of yellow roses, lending their unique fragrance to the other smells of the room. Coffee, grease paint, Lysol, fabric softener, and dust. Erin's heart twisted. She didn't need a card to know who the flowers were from. Matt always sent her yellow roses on the nights he was in the audience. She hadn't spoken to him since their fight, and had wondered if he would skip opening night simply to get back at her. She should have known better. Matt wasn't that type. She cleared a place among the clutter of makeup and hair supplies on her dressing table for the vase. The stage manager broke in over the intercom system every 15 minutes to give them a countdown to curtain while the actors did their makeup. Erin finished gluing on her fake eyelashes as the dressers arrived to help with costumes. I'm so glad corsets are a thing of the past. Erin panted after Anna had cinched her into the basic white corset Charlotte wore. Don't forget petticoats, Anna said. She tossed the white cotton petticoat sewn with hoops over Erin's head and tied it at the waist. The rest of Erin's opening act costume consisted of a gray dress with long bell-shaped sleeves and a full skirt, and a large white apron. Her wig was of fine brown hair, pulled into a rather severe bun at the back of her head. While they were making sure none of Erin's real hair was escaping the wig, the stage manager came over the intercom. Full house tonight, places in 10 minutes. Break a leg, everyone. Erin took as deep a breath as her corset would allow. This was what she loved. But even so, the minutes before curtain were always nerve-wracking. Break a leg. Jocelyn held out her hand, pinky extended. Erin looped her own pinky around Jocelyn's. You too. She made her way backstage, dodging stagehands, to the table where each prop had its own designated spot, marked by masking tape. She did a quick once-over to make sure her props were where they should be, and her beaded evening bag from Act 2 held the shawl Anna had worked so hard on. Arms looped around her from behind and pulled her tightly against a broad chest. Break a leg tonight, Brennan whispered, and goosebumps erupted at the feeling of his breath on her neck. You too. She spun to face him. He was impossibly handsome in his tall black boots, black trousers, and white, loose-fitting shirt under a gray vest. With his dark, slicked-back hair, he looked every inch the Byronic hero. You're going to ruin the makeup, she teased as he bent to kiss her lips. He gave her the lightest whisper of a kiss before disappearing into the gloom, making his way to the other side of the stage for his entrance. A surge of guilt raced through her when she thought of Matt. He sat in the audience. His flowers were on her dressing table, and she was in the wings kissing Brennan. But she and Matt would only ever be friends, if they were even that anymore. Then the stage manager signaled and the house lights went out. The show started, and she forgot about everything else. If the cast was nervous about the presence of the Broadway sponsors in the audience, they handled it well. The play went as flawlessly as any live performance could go, and by the end of the show, Erin was exhausted but excited. The applause at the end was long and loud. Afterward, she drank bottled water in the dressing room while Anna helped her out of her costume and wig. Then she washed off the stage makeup and reapplied something more subtle for the opening night party. Her party clothes were hanging on the costume rack, the same silvery dress she'd worn to Nikki's wedding, only this time with the addition of a light, matching wrap. She changed, then slipped into some high-heeled black sandals, small silver hoop earrings, and the Tiffany Camp Wallachie bracelet she'd gotten from Nikki. Jocelyn changed too, into much flashier party clothes. A black sequined miniskirt and a gold tank with a draped neckline that showed off her smooth skin and toned shoulders. She applied her own makeup and tamed her curly hair with a black sequined headband. Shortly before she was supposed to meet Brennan at his dressing room, Erin hurried across the empty stage and slipped out the stage door. They hadn't made plans to meet, but he always waited for her on the nights he came to the performance. She hadn't even questioned whether he'd be waiting tonight. Matt leaned against the brick wall next to the garage door, where large set pieces were loaded and unloaded directly onto the stage. His face lit up when he saw her. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," she said. He pushed off the wall and came toward her. "I wouldn't miss it. Congratulations. You were fabulous." "Thank you. And thank you for the flowers. They're beautiful." She hugged him gingerly, feeling like she was somehow wronging him, or wronging Brennan, or maybe wronging both of them. He pulled back and stepped away, putting a respectful distance between them. "I guess you're going to the party?" he asked, taking in her outfit. "Yeah." Erin drew her coat closed, suddenly feeling self-conscious in her dress. It wasn't skimpy, but it definitely showed more skin than usual. "Erin, I need to apologize. I wasn't being fair to you," Matt finally said. She bit her lip, ruining her lipstick. "I'm the one who should be apologizing to you," she said in a low voice. "I haven't meant to lead you on, but obviously that's how it came across." "Has it been that way this whole time?" he asked softly. "I thought we had a pretty good friendship as well." "Yes, we do. Or we did. But you want more, and I guess I can't give it to you. I never meant to hurt you," she added quickly, hating the look those words put on his face. "I hope, like anything, you believe me. And I hope you believe I hate the way it is now. I miss you," she finished in a small voice. "So we can't go back to being friends?" he asked. She shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. Is it even possible once you've crossed that line? Can you ever go back from a kiss?" The stage door crashed open and Brennan emerged, looking like a model in his black wool coat and gray scarf. He'd shaved, and his dark hair was carefully styled. "There you are," he said to Erin with relief. "I've been looking everywhere." Her gaze darted to Matt, then to Brennan, then back to Matt. "Sorry," she said. "I came outside for some air." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Brennan stuck out his hand. "Brennan Avery," he said to Matt. "Oh, sorry." Erin fumbled for words. "This is my friend, Matt." The two men shook hands, Matt looking as if he'd rather shake hands with a piranha. "I enjoyed the show," he said tightly. "Thanks," Brennan said. "It's been fun to work on a Jerome Kirby piece again. It's been a while. Did you know I originated the role of Dashner in The Artful Boz, his play about Charles Dickens?" "Never heard of it," Matt said. Erin caught the tone in Matt's voice, even if Brennan didn't. "That was clear back in..." Brennan frowned. "Was it 2008 or 2009? I can't remember." "I'm sure you could Google it," Matt said dryly, deliberately ignoring Erin's look of annoyance. Brennan smiled easily. "Or I could call my mother. She keeps scrapbooks of all my shows. Who needs Google when you have Mom?" He glanced at Erin.
We'd better get going, babe. They'll be waiting for us.
He looped his arm around her shoulders and steered her toward his white Mercedes, which was parked along the street. "Thanks for coming," she called to Matt, her voice coming out thin and strained. If he responded, she didn't hear it. Matt watched as Brennan helped Erin into his fancy car and walked around to the driver's side. Brennan gave Matt a brief wave before climbing in and roaring away, and it took all of Matt's self-restraint not to make a rude gesture at the taillights as the Mercedes zoomed out of sight. He decided to leave his car at the theater and walk home along the Mon River Trail. Taking the trail added at least a mile to his route. But the Monongahela River was soothing to his frazzled nerves and bruised heart. Besides, it wasn't like he had anything else to do tonight. He needed to get over her. She was moving on, probably literally when the play went to Broadway. Whatever they'd shared was obviously one-sided, and obviously over, at least as far as she was concerned. All Brennan Avery had to do was snap his fingers, and she'd gone running. He picked up a small rock and hurled it into the river. Why did Erin get to hold all the cards? He'd screwed up by waiting too long to show her how he felt, and he'd been friend-zoned for it. And right when he'd thought she might be changing her mind, here came Mr. Showbiz Avery, and he was right back to where he'd been before, waiting around for her and cleaning up after her drama. Speaking of cleaning up, she was off to party with her dreamboat while Matt went home to Roswell. As much as he liked the dog, he made for poor company on a night like this. He bent and scooped up a handful of gravel and peppered the river with it. Enough was enough. Chapter 22. The party was in full swing by the time Erin and Brennan arrived. "We're late," Erin fretted. "Nope, we're making our entrance," Brennan said with a grin. He was proven right when they entered the room, and it erupted in cheers, almost like a wedding. For half a second, Erin expected a DJ to holler, "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan Avery." Then they were engulfed, each drawn into a separate crowd of admirers. Somewhere along the way, Erin acquired a glass of champagne, and she sipped it as she circulated, accepting compliments, posing for pictures, and making small talk with dozens of guests. As much as she loved acting, Erin was under no illusions. She knew it took more than stellar performances to keep the Azure Company going. It took patrons, wealthy patrons who were able and willing to write big checks. And it didn't matter if she was tired or her feet hurt. In a lot of ways, she was still on stage and still playing her part. Mona, Sean, and Jerome seemed to have developed a sophisticated system of tag, each taking their turn with one of the two Broadway producers. The unanswered question hung in the air like a fog. Was the show good enough? Would they take it to New York? "You were marvelous, my dear." A tiny old woman with enormous diamond rings on both hands patted Erin's arm. "I want to come see it again. How long is the run?" 3 weeks, Erin replied. "We close October 10th. "It doesn't seem long enough for all the work, does it?" The woman clucked sympathetically. Erin smiled. "It never does." The woman tugged on Erin's arm until she leaned down. "I hear there's a good chance for New York," she whispered conspiratorially. Her breath smelled like butterscotch. "I certainly hope so. The world needs this show, don't you agree, Mr. Kirby?" The woman reached out a wrinkled hand to snag Jerome's sleeve. Erin hadn't even seen him walking by. If Jerome was startled at being grabbed suddenly by an old woman in a crowd, he didn't show it. "You're absolutely right," he said, spinning smoothly on the heel of one polished shoe to join them. "Trust me, no one is hoping more than I am that we can make it happen." "Well, if you do, you must take this young lady along as your star," the woman insisted. giving Erin a beaming glance. She was simply breathtaking tonight, and the chemistry between Charlotte and Heger, amazing. Erin smiled and tried not to fidget. I agree, Jerome said. Erin is superb as Charlotte. Erin felt giddy enough to dance. Her eyes sought Brennan. He was across the room, deep in conversation with his own crowd of patrons. Female patrons, Erin couldn't help noticing. As if he sensed her gaze, Brennan looked up and gave her a quick wink. She grinned and turned back to the old woman in time to catch Jerome's last words. A check directly to me or the theater, whichever you're more comfortable with. I most certainly will. The woman gave Erin one more smile, showing her yellowed teeth. Best of luck to you, my dear. I hope to someday say I knew you when. She moved off into the crowd, and Erin turned to Jerome. Did she just promise a donation? He nodded. Several $1,000. Now we'll have to see if she comes through with it. How do you do that? Jerome laughed. If you're going to make it in theater, you have to know how to get money out of people. Build something from cardboard, spray paint, and glitter, but make them think it's gold and diamonds. And more importantly, get them to pay for gold and diamonds. She shared his laughter and even clinked her champagne glass with his. But after he moved away, she felt jaded and a little sad. She had never been naive enough to think the art of it was enough, but she was idealistic enough to wish it could be. Erin became increasingly restless as the party dragged on. She was about to find Brennan and ask him to take her home when there was a sound of silverware on crystal. Mona stood in the center of the room, ringing her champagne glass with a spoon. This is coming rather quickly, she said into the sudden silence. But I'm so excited to tell you, the Collins Group has offered to fund an opening in New York. We're going to Broadway. There was a moment of silence while they absorbed the news. Then the room erupted. Jocelyn appeared from nowhere, squealing as she threw her arms around a stunned Erin. Erin returned the hug, searching the crowd for Brennan over Jocelyn's shoulder. Suddenly, he was there, sweeping her into his arms, away from Jocelyn. The room whirled as he spun her in a circle, and she was dimly aware of the faces streaming by amid dozens of camera flashes. Erin was dizzy by the time he set her down. She stumbled against his chest in her high heels, clutching at him to keep her balance. I'm going to New York, she murmured in disbelief. Brennan laughed and kissed her. You sure are, babe. Isn't it fantastic? The party ended late. There were still many details to work out, but Mona told them the plan was to open in the Shaw Theater off Broadway the last week in November, a little more than 7 weeks away. 7 weeks? Erin had asked in disbelief when she heard the schedule. So fast? It's about normal, Brennan disagreed, especially if most of the cast is already in place. Not everyone would be going. Brennan was going, of course, and much to her relief, so was Erin. Of course you have to come, Mona had said graciously, kissing Erin on both cheeks. And besides, I'll make it a condition of my contract, Brennan promised later as they stood outside her apartment. They have to hire you or I won't do it. Erin closed her eyes and wrapped her arms around his neck. She was giddy and excited and determined to lose herself in the kiss. But she couldn't. Even as his lips touched hers, she was aware of how much her feet ached in her high heels and how tired she felt. When Brennan pulled her closer as his kiss increased in passion, all she could think of was the green-painted door with the brass knocker 3 places down from hers. She pulled back. What's wrong? Brennan asked. Nothing, just tired. It's been a wild day. He kissed the top of her head. It's only beginning. Get some sleep. I'll text you tomorrow. After he'd gone, Erin went inside and slipped off her shoes, sighing with relief. She stood in the darkness inside her apartment and let it all sink in. The play, the party, Brennan, and New York. And Matt. She'd left him standing there in the parking lot like an unfinished sentence. She glanced at her phone. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. But this couldn't wait, and she knew he'd still be awake. She grabbed her slippers and padded down the hallway. Matt answered her light knock. He wore striped pajama bottoms and an old t-shirt. His eyes were shadowed and tired. At his side, Roswell wagged his tail and tried to jump on Erin. Matt turned and went back into the apartment ahead of her, leaving her to struggle with the dog. When she'd finally made it inside and shut the door, he gave her a measured look. How'd it go? There was something different in his eyes. Something hard. A look she hadn't seen before. Good, she said warily. We're going to New York. He stood in the center of the room, arms folded. That's great, he said in a neutral tone. Congratulations. Thanks. We're all very excited. Only right now, it didn't feel exciting. It felt sad, like the end of an era. As long as I'm at it, I may as well congratulate you on your boyfriend, Matt said, not bothering to keep the bitterness from his voice. He's not my boyfriend, Erin replied. It was the wrong thing to say. Really? Matt scowled. I couldn't tell. Erin flinched. What's with you tonight? He shrugged. Who knows? Maybe it's late and I've been at work all day. Maybe I'm sick of taking the dumb dog out to pee. Maybe I'm tired of being used. Used? She took a step back. Is that what you think I've been doing? I really don't know anymore, Erin. For a while I thought we had a pretty good thing going, and then... He sighed and raked his fingers through his hair, making it stand on end. Roswell whined and Matt glared at him. Go lay down, he ordered, and Roswell slunk off to the bedroom. Then what? Erin prodded. Then when I put all the pieces together, I see a different picture. You do whatever you want, and I wait around wishing you'd notice me. Only you don't. At least not until you get in over your head. Then you holler and I come running. That's not... I don't... she began. But her words rang hollow, because he was right. I'm sorry you feel that way, she said quietly. I haven't meant to use you. Are you just saying that because you know that's what I want to hear? His voice had an edge of cynicism she'd never heard before. So unlike the Matt she knew. No, I really am sorry. I guess I didn't realize. You never do, he said. You are so wrapped up in daydreams that you don't even see what's right in front of you. What's right in front of me? She demanded. You have this idea that falling in love is supposed to be some big, dramatic, I don't know what, he said, waving his arms. And if it's not just like that, you won't even consider it. Falling in love? She stared at him. He hesitated as if trying to decide whether to go for it. Then he plunged ahead. Yes, Erin, I love you, as if it isn't obvious. I don't... Her mind was a jumble, her emotions a confusing mix of panic and elation. We never said anything about love, she finally whispered. Matt's eyes hardened. I know, and I won't say it again. I just wanted you to know how I felt. I wanted to tell you at least once. Her head was fuzzy from exhaustion and champagne. It took her a minute to work out what he meant. So that's it, she said. We can't even still be friends? He met her eyes with a steady gaze. I have enough friends, he said evenly. She blinked through tears. This goodbye was the one she dreaded most, and it was coming too suddenly, too early. She'd been counting on having a few more weeks with him. "Please don't say that," she begged. I thought you would." Her words faltered. What had she thought? That he'd be content to stay in the shadows indefinitely? She could see the muscles in his jaw working as he ground his teeth. "Goodbye, Erin," he said softly. Tears ran down her cheeks as she wrenched the door open and fled. Chapter 23. Erin had enjoyed Nikki's wedding for many reasons, but the best part had been catching up with the Camp Wallace girls. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed them, and how much of their lives she'd missed out on as they gradually fell out of touch. She was determined to stay in closer contact with all of them. Okay, crashing at Lindsay's Brooklyn apartment could be considered too close in contact, but with everything happening so fast, she wouldn't have time, or money, to hunt for an apartment until after the play opened. Thank goodness Lindsay was happy to offer Erin a place to stay. Except, I think I've brought too much stuff. Erin surveyed the tiny apartment. Lindsay had warned her it was small, but even so, Erin hadn't prepared for exactly how small. The living room was crowded with a love seat that folded out to a bed, an easy chair and a bookcase, over which hung a small flat-screen TV. The kitchen was one wall with a small fridge and a miniature stove, and the two-seater dining set shoved up against the opposite wall. New York size. "Why don't we stack everything over there, and I'll get some space cleaned out as soon as I can?" Lindsay offered, pointing to a corner of the living room. "I can take some of this to storage," Erin said. Lindsay shook her head. "It's no problem. I'm spending so much time at the bakery, I'm hardly ever home anyway. Besides, I want you to be comfortable." They ordered Greek food for dinner and spent the evening catching up. Lindsay was almost set to open her own bakery, a dream she'd had for a long time. "I remember you talking about it at camp," Erin said, rolling a French fry in spicy mayo. "Didn't you already have a name for it?" "Yeah, Lindsay's Luscious Luxuries." Lindsay wrinkled her nose. "How gross does that sound? I changed it to Sugar Bee Sweets. Much better, right?" Erin nodded. "Much better." Lindsay sighed. "I never thought it would be this much hassle," she confessed. "I have to get permits for everything, and of course there's a fee every time. The floor refinishers say they can't start until I have the permits from the city, but the city won't give me the permits until I have an inspection. Guess how long the wait is for them to send an inspector over? Forever! I was hoping to have the floors done by the end of the week so I can paint, but now who knows?" She took a bite of her gyro and chewed angrily. "It sounds like a lot of work for one person," Erin said. It was on the tip of her tongue to offer to help, but she held herself back. She had enough on her plate. Besides, she didn't think Brennan would be the type to jump in and help the way Matt always did when she got in over her head. As always, thoughts of Matt brought a twisting ache to her chest. She hadn't seen him since that night in his apartment. He'd avoided her, and she had been too overcome with shame and misery to seek him out. Had she really only been using him? If that were the case, it wouldn't hurt this much, would it? No, they'd been friends. He brought her happiness and stability, and she brought him… what? Heartache and drama. Her guilt was like a wound that wouldn't heal. "I'm so excited for you," Lindsay said, and Erin focused her attention back on her friend. "A play on Broadway and Brennan Avery for a boyfriend? Exactly what you dreamed about, right?" Erin's throat was tied as she shook her head. "He's not my boyfriend." "But he will be eventually. You were always so certain about what you wanted. Fame, money, glory. Not necessarily in that order." "I remember I probably talked about it way too much," Erin countered. "Remember how I used to sing everyone to sleep with a lullaby every night at camp?" She winced. What a dork. "It was sweet," Lindsay insisted. But I don't remember "Do You Hear the People Sing" being much of a lullaby. Usually all you did was get us marching around until someone came in and yelled at us to be quiet. Suddenly, Erin was homesick for those sweet, innocent weeks at camp, when she'd had all the time in the world and an absolute certainty that the future held only happiness. Fame plus a rich husband equaled happily ever after, right? Adult Erin was finding real life to be a great deal more complicated. She glanced at the clock on Lindsay's microwave, startled to see how late it had become. I should get some sleep, she said reluctantly. I'm helping with auditions tomorrow. How early do I need to leave to be on time? Lindsay began cleaning up the food wrappers. The subway traffic is pretty hairy into Manhattan in the mornings. You probably want to leave at least 2 hours early. A 2-hour commute when she was less than 10 miles away? Erin groaned. Finding a place in Manhattan would be one of the first things she'd do with her new paycheck. Chapter 24. Matt let Roswell chase him up the stairs to his apartment. When they reached the 3rd floor, Matt turned left, but Roswell turned right and took off down the hall. Hey! But the dog ignored him, and Matt quickly saw why. Mrs. Brinkerhoff's door was open. The noise of conversation drifted toward him, cutting off abruptly when they evidently saw the dog. Holla freaking Luya. She's finally back. Matt jogged down the hall and rapped on the doorframe. Hello? A man stood in the middle of the living room, clutching a sheaf of papers to his chest. He was clean-shaven and had a sheen of sweat on his forehead where his gray hair had receded. The sleeves of his light blue dress shirt were rolled to the elbows, and his rust-colored tie was loose around his neck. He watched Roswell warily. The dog stood several feet away, his hackles up and teeth bared. Roswell, no, Matt ordered. He moved quickly into the room and grabbed the dog's collar. Sorry, he's just excited to be home. He waited for the guy to call for Mrs. Brinkerhoff, while Roswell strained against the collar, trying to get away. Matt dropped his backpack to the floor and fumbled in the front pocket for the leash. Sit, he ordered, clipping the leash to the collar. Roswell reluctantly sat. Matt eyed the man. Any time now. Is there something I can do for you? The man finally asked. I'm Matt, Mrs. Brinkerhoff's neighbor. Is she back? Another man appeared from the kitchen. This one was slightly younger, judging by the darker hair, which he wore long and messy. His yellow polo shirt was open at the neck and tucked into a pair of faded jeans. The two men exchanged a look at Matt's words. I'm Carson, the first man said. This is my brother Donald. Connie, Mrs. Brinkerhoff, was our mother. Was? Matt took a sharp breath. She had a heart attack last month. At my house, the younger man said softly, tears shining in his dark eyes. The coroner thought it must have happened in the middle of the night. When she didn't come out of her room, I went in and found her. I'm so sorry, Matt said, stunned. How terrible. Carson nodded and waved the papers around the room. It's been a shock. We're finally finding the time to go through all her things and get everything in order. Is there anything I can do to help? That's very kind of you, but no, we've got it covered. Matt hesitated. It felt like a bad time to bring it up, but what else could he do? What about Roswell? Roswell? Carson blinked in confusion at the dog. Is he... hers? Yes. Donald groaned. I forgot about the stupid dog. Well, I can't take him. Sabrina's allergic. Carson pinched the bridge of his nose. Okay, I guess. He looked at his watch. We have an appointment with Mom's attorney in half an hour. Could he stay with you one more night and we can get him in the morning? I'd be happy to pay you for your trouble. It's no trouble, Matt said. We had a rough couple of days at the beginning, but he's doing okay now. Carson stuck out his hand. Thanks a lot. What's your apartment number? We'll come by in the morning.
Matt gave him the number and they shook hands. Roswell whimpered in confusion when Matt tried to pull him out of the apartment, but finally he came, head hanging and with his tail between his legs. As they reached the door, Matt heard Carson mutter to Donald,
I don't want that thing either. Add the animal shelter to your list.
"He's a purebred." Matt turned. "He was probably really expensive. I'm sure he's got papers around here somewhere." He glanced around the room as if they could find Roswell's papers framed on the wall or displayed on the coffee table. Well, given how much Mrs. Brinkerhoff had loved him, it was possible. The brothers exchanged a long look.
Do you have time to sell him?
Carson asked. When Donald shook his head, he turned back to Matt.
We weren't counting on the dog. I guess someone at the shelter will be lucky to have him.
Later that night, when he settled on the couch with Roswell curled up next to him, Matt ran his fingers through the soft white fur. He'd had the dog over a month, and the thought of him leaving brought a sharp ache to Matt's throat. But what else could he do? His life was blowing up all around him. He didn't have time for a dog. "I'm sorry, boy," he said softly, staring into the dog's bright blue eyes. Roswell put one paw on Matt's leg, and the look he gave Matt seemed to say he understood. End of Part 4.